Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lord's Day Holy Reading on this Lord's Day. Good to have you with us. We're continuing with Thomas Manton on Christ's Transfiguration. And here's Mr. Peck to continue on.
All right, welcome. We're in Sermon 1. We started it last week, excuse me, and we'll finish it today, Lord willing. And we had started, Manton has 2 points in the section that we were in. One, the choice of his company, and two, the choice of Christ's company, and two, his preparative action while he was on the mount. And we had reached, there's 6 main points in the choice of his company, and we had reached subpoint 3, or main point 3, which starts with, because our love to God should put us upon loving his people and making them our intimates, for religion influenceth all things, our relations, common employments, friendship, and converse. 1 John 5, verse 1, everyone that loveth him that begat, loveth him also that is begotten of him. The new nature inclineth to both. There is an inward propension and inclination, needing no outward provocation and allurements. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 9, as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for you yourselves are taught of God to love one another. God's teaching is by effectual impression or inclining the heart. It is a smart question, that of the prophet in 2 Chronicles 19, verse 2. Shouldest thou hate the godly and love those that hate the Lord? And I looked that one up, and that's not how the King James has it. I'll read. It's very similar, but in the King James says, for 2 Chronicles 19, verse 2, shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? And he's referring to Jehoshaphat aiding Ahab. So, I mean, I don't know why they put it like that here, but it's generally the same meaning. So anyway, I just happened to look at that, and a little bit of change there on the actual wording. Anyway, along those lines of thought, should thou hate the godly and love those that hate the Lord? Surely a gracious heart cannot take them, the ungodly, into his bosom. He loveth all with a love of goodwill, as seeking their good, but not with a love of complacency, as in delighting in them. And he starts to mention complacency a few times, so I looked that up in Webster's 1828, which is pleasure, satisfaction, gratification. It is more than approbation and less, and Webster says, and less than delight or joy. So I might be splitting some hairs there because he mentions delight as part of it. So anyway, it's pleasure, satisfaction, gratification. You have more involvement with the people you're interacting with in your affections toward them. He loveth all with a love of goodwill, as seeking their good, but not with a love of complacency, as delighting in them. Our neighbor, just your average neighbor, must be loved as ourselves, our natural or carnal neighbor as our natural self, with a love of benevolence, which is just, we know that pretty well. It's the disposition to do good, goodwill, kindness, charitableness, with a love of benevolence, and our spiritual neighbor as our spiritual self, with a love of complacency. In the past, I'm adding that because it doesn't make much sense otherwise. We have hated our sinful neighbor and hated ourselves, much more as to love of benevolence. We must neither hate ourselves, our neighbor, nor our enemy because of benevolence. But it is complacency we are speaking of. And so, quote, the wicked is an abomination to the righteous, Proverbs 29, verse 27. The hatred of displacency, which is incivility, that which displeases or disobliges. The hatred of displacency is opposite to the love of complacency, as the hatred of enmity is to the love of benevolence. We cannot enter into a confederacy and intimate kindness with them, the ungodly. Main point 4, because that love which is built upon holiness is the most durable and lasting, as reasons for your choices of company. There is a confederacy in evil, as between drunkards with drunkards and robbers with robbers. Proverbs 1 verse 14, cast in thy lot amongst us, let us all have one common purse. Or when men conspire against the truth and interest of Christ in the world, as Gebal and Ammon and Amalek leagued themselves against God's people, divided in interests but united in hatred, as the Pharisees and Herodians agreed together to tempt Christ, and Herod and Pilate, though otherwise not very good friends, agreed to mock him. This is unitas contra unitatum, which is unit to unit, and or consortium factionis, a bond of iniquity, which is company party. Now this friendship is soon dissolved, for these men, though they agree in evil, yet have contrary lusts and interests, and besides, partners in evil are usually objects reviving guilt. Their very presence upbraids the consciences of one another with the remembrance of their past sins, and sin, though it be sweet in the committing, yet is hateful and bitter in the remembrance of it. Again, there is a civil friendship built on natural pleasure and profit. Certainly men are at liberty to choose their company as their interests and course of employments leads them. This may be a society for trade or civil respect. It cannot be a true and proper friendship, for riches, which are so frail and slippery, can never make a firm tie and bond of hearts and minds. Proverbs 14 verse 20, the poor is hated even of his own neighbor, but the rich hath many friends. Proverbs 19 verse 6, many will entreat the favor of a prince, and every man is a friend to him that giveth gifts. All the brethren of the poor do hate him, etc. And as it is a fluid, so it is a base and sordid friendship that is built upon riches, for that concerneth the estate rather than the soul. Well then, religious friendship, which is built upon virtue and grace and is called, quote, the unity of the Spirit, Ephesians 4 verse 3, is the most firm bond of all. Sinful societies are soon dissolved, and the profane, though they seem to hold together, yet upon every cross word may fall out and break. And civil friendship, which is only built upon pleasures and profit, standeth upon a brittle foundation. Certainly the good and the holy are not so changeable as the bad and the carnal. Besides, that friendship which is built upon honesty and godliness is amicitia per se, which is of friendship accordingly, and the other is amicitia per accidens, which is pretty clear, friendship accidental. It cometh from constitution of soul and likeness of spirits, and the good we seek may be possessed without envy. The friends do not straiten and entrench upon one another. And again, in another point, there is a virtuous friendship, which consists in a harmony of minds or an agreement in some common studies. This is more noble and more like true friendship than society for trade and temporal interests, but yet this friendship is not so durable, for at last it must be broken off by death. But the godly are everlasting companions. Besides, self-love and envy are more apt to invade other friendships, but the godly, if they be true to the laws of spiritual friendship, they seek the good of one another as much as their own, and rejoice in the graces of one another as much as in their own. All right, I made a mistake last time. This is now main point 3. Though we owe this religious friendship to all that fear God, yet some few may be chosen for our intimacy and spiritual solace. We owe it in some respects to all that fear God, and must dispense the general acts of friendship to them. Acts 4:32, the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. And Christian love is called the bond of perfectness, Colossians 3:14, because it is the band by which holy and Christian societies, called churches, are bound together and preserved. Otherwise, like a besom unbound, they fall all to pieces. But yet this doth not hinder, but that some may be chosen for our intimacy. Christ, that denied himself to many of the commodities of human life, would not live without special friends, and would enjoy this virtuous solace. And in David and Jonathan, we have an instance of it. 1 Samuel 18, verse 1, and the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Certainly too many cannot perform the acts of intimate friendship to us, nor we to them. The love then being like a river dispersed into several channels, and will be shallower and weaker. Therefore our choice friends must be but few, inter binos et bonos, between the two, by two, and the good, was the old rule, though it need not be so straitly confined. Main point 4, in the choice of these few friends, we must use caution. Subpoint 1, such as are near to us, with whom we have frequent and familiar converse, and perform a mutual interchange of all offices of love. Proverbs 18, verse 24, a man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend which sticketh closer than a brother. Consanguinity, which is blood relations, and affinity is not so near a tie as that friendship. Subpoint 2, not only near, but those who are holy, prudent, and good. Proverbs 13, verse 20, he that walketh with the wise shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. Subpoint 3, such as are most likely to be faithful. Job 6, verse 15 and 16, my brethren have dealt deceitfully with me as a brook, and as the stream of brooks they pass away. Pools in winter, when less need of water, but dried up in summer, when water in those parched countries was a great commodity. So many seem to be great friends, heighten our expectation, but in our necessities and straits leave us destitute. Ye see me cast down and are afraid, saith Job, as if I should be a burden to you. Dearest friends may disappoint us, their affection lacks an inward principle. He says once, but it's lax. It is a winter brook and not a spring. Therefore, since the heart of man is so deceitful, and not only deceitful, but though sincere, for the present, very changeable, and this is so important an interest of human life, and the vexation of a disappointment in a bosom friend is so grievous, and involveth us in many inconveniences, natural and spiritual. For Solomon telleth us, Proverbs 25, verse 19, confidence in an unfaithful friend in time of trouble is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. When we think to eat with the broken tooth, or to walk with the foot out of joint, we are put to grievous pain and torment. Therefore we should go to God and pray him to direct us in the choice of intimate friends. David sadly regrets a disappointment in a friend, Psalm 55, verses 12 through 15, for it was not an enemy that reproached me, and we sing of this. Then I could have borne it, nor was it he that hated me that did magnify himself against me. Then I would have hid myself from him. But it was thou, a man, mine equal, my guide, and mine acquaintance, etc. A deceitful friend may become the greatest foe, and we resent their ingratitude more than the injuries of others, when they abuse their trust and the familiarity they had with us. The worst that a professed enemy can do is not so grievous as the treachery of a professed friend. This is more piercing, less to be avoided. Therefore, whom we have used most familiarly and freely, loved as our soul and life, from such we expect the same firm and hearty friendship. Therefore it concerneth us to seek to God that we may have a godly wise man with whom we may be free in all cases of mind or conscience, and to whom we may freely open ourselves and be strengthened in the service of God. It is a great part of our contentment and happiness, therefore, that we may not be deceived in our choice. Let us go to God, who knoweth hearts, and God hath a great hand in this. Psalm 88, verse 8, Thou hast put away my acquaintance from me. Thou hast made me an abomination to them. By the providence of God, they left him as a man whose condition they were afraid to look upon. And again, verse 9, Lover and friend hast thou put far from me. They stand aloof from me as an execrable thing. He owneth providence in it. Overall, point 5, when friends be thus chosen, there must be a faithful discharge of the duties of friendship, both in counsels and reproofs. For the godly use this friendship chiefly for spiritual ends. Subpoint 1, in counsel, for Solomon telleth us, Proverbs 22, verse 9, as ointment and perfume rejoice the heart, so doth the sweetness of a man's friend by hearty counsel. As sweet perfumes are a reviving, so to be supported in good resolutions, or directed and guided in our way to heaven by a faithful friend, is very cheering and comfortable. And we read 1 Samuel 23, verses 16 and 17, that Jonathan went to David and strengthened his hand in God. Whereas, on the contrary, a carnal friend is the greatest bane that may be, who doth strengthen us in evil. An instance whereof we have in Jonadab, the son of Shimei, 2 Samuel 13, verses 3 and 4, and quote, Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, and Jonadab was a subtle man, and he gave him counsel how he should surprise his sister, to defile her and satisfy his incestuous lust. Such a friend is really and truly our greatest foe. He was a friend to his vice, but a foe to his person and soul. Whereas a true friend, whose friendship is grounded on godliness, will be a foe to our sins by wholesome admonition and rebukes, and a friend to our soul's salvation. Subpoint 2, under main point 5, reproofs. That is also a part of friendship. Proverbs 27, verse 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. A faithful friend's wounds are a more sincere testimony than an enemy's kisses, and so afterwards they will be interpreted. Proverbs 28, verse 23, he that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with his tongue. For this we must trust God, though for the present we displease our friends. So Leviticus 19, verse 17, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thy heart by suffering sin upon him. And printed that one out. It's very instructive as to how it is hate. It's kind of hard to hear that, but when we don't inform our friends as we should. Leviticus 19:17, thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. This is Gill, sorry. Although no hatred may be expressed either by words or deeds, yet being in the heart is a breach of the sixth command. See Matthew 5:21 and 22. And of this a man may be guilty when he does not attempt to save the life of his neighbor, either by bearing a testimony for him or by delivering from danger, as preserving him from drowning, from wild beasts and thieves, as in Leviticus 19, verse 16, or when he does not reprove him for sin, as in the next clause, but suffers him to go on in it to his ruin, either of which by interpretation is an hatred of him. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor, the next part. And he says, for any sin committed by him, though secretly, yet known, which rebuke should be private, and repeated, as may be found necessary, and given gently in meekness and tenderness, and the rest of the verse, and not suffer sin upon him. And Gill, unconvinced of, unrepented of, and persisted in, which may prove of fatal consequence to him, and therefore to let him alone and go on in it without telling him of it and reproving him for it, would be so far from acting the kind and friendly part and showing him love and respect, that it would be an evidence of hating him at heart. At least it might be strongly suspected. Or, quote, and not bear sin for him. become a partner with him in his sin, and so become liable to bear punishment for it, which is another strong reason for reproving sin in a proper manner, lest we should be partakers of other men's sins. See 1 Timothy 5:20 and 5:22. It is kindness to his soul to reprove him. In the general, holy friendship must be improved to the use of edifying. Romans 1, verse 11 and 12. I long to see you to impart some spiritual gift unto you, that I may be comforted together with you by the mutual faith of you and me. Overall, main point 6, the last one in this section. After the best care is used, you must remember that our friends are but an outward help, which God can continue or withdraw at his pleasure, and that our chief help, comfort, and counsel cometh of God. So it was with Christ, John 16, verse 32, Behold, the hour is come, that ye shall be parted, every man to his own, and shall leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. Christ was forsaken of his disciples, but not forsaken of his Father. So Paul, 2 Timothy 1, verse 16, At my first answer no man stood with me, but all men forsook me. Psalm 41, verse 9, My familiar friend, in whom I trusted, hath lifted up his heel against me. Those that have been acquainted with the secrets of your soul may not only grow strange to you, but betray you. Therefore, do not overvalue any earthly friend. And you can look at, to me, you can look at that at the other end of it is using a best friend as God, almost talking to them about all your problems and frustrations in life and whatnot. And instead of taking them to the Lord, you can, even just temporarily leave those matters with a trusted close friend. So we must learn not to overvalue any earthly friend for all these reasons and that last one. Man will be man still, that God may be God, all in all unto his people. And when we are deserted of men, we must learn to trust in God, who never faileth us, fail who will. Psalm 27, verse 10, When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. And Psalm 142, verses 4 and 5, I looked on my right hand and beheld, and no man would know me. Refuge failed me, no man cared for my soul. I cried unto thee, O Lord. I said, Thou art my refuge and portion in the land of the living. We are left alone for God to help us at times. The defectiveness of all worldly friends shows us more of the goodness of God. So even in that we profit. Now we've come to the preparative action. He went up into a mountain to pray, and whilst he prayed, he was transfigured. 1. In that he prayed, it teacheth us to hallow all our actions by prayer. We do not bid ourselves Godspeed unless we recommend our affairs to God. Whatsoever assurance we have of the blessing, yet we must pray. Jeremiah 29, verses 10 through 12. For thus saith the Lord, after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word towards you in causing you to return to this place, etc. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. Ezekiel 36, verse 37, I will for this be inquired of by the house of Israel to do it for them. Therefore we should be daily in the practice of this duty, and not look upon it as a work that may well be spared. If Christ, who as to his divine nature was equal with God, prayed as often as he did, he didn't put that in, but I think he meant to. Surely we should often come and prostrate ourselves before him in this act of holy adoration. Christ had right and title to all. All was his due, yet he was much in prayer. How dare we go about any business, whether it's temporal or spiritual, out here, or anybody, without his leave, counsel, and blessing, and usurp any of his blessings without begging them by prayer. Subpoint 2, while he prayed, he was transfigured. Luke 9, verse 29, which teacheth us two things. One, that we have the highest communications from God in prayer, and then Christ's shape was altered. By prayer, the soul hath the most familiar converse with God that possibly it can have, and also by the means of this duty, God hath most familiar converse with us. In our prayers to God, we have experience of the operations of the Spirit. Romans 8, verse 26, likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself helpeth us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And had that printed out from Gil. It's kind of long, so I won't do it all. I'll shorten some of it. But likewise, the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. It's a very good section. The Spirit of God, which dwells in us, by whom we are led, who is the Spirit of adoption to us, who has witnessed to our spirits that we are the children of God, whose first fruits we have received over and above, and besides what he has done for us, quote, also helpeth our infirmities, whilst we are groaning within ourselves, both for ourselves and for others, and are waiting patiently for what we are hoping for. The people of God, all of them, more or less, have their infirmities in this life. They are not indeed weak and infirm in such sense as unregenerate persons who have no spiritual strength and are ignorant of their weakness and do not go to Christ for strength, nor derive any from him, and hence can perform nothing that is spiritually good. Nor are they all alike Christians, infirm. Some are weaker in faith, knowledge, and experience than others. Some are of more weak, scrupulous consciences than others be. Some are more easily drawn aside through corruption and temptation than others. Some have weaker gifts, particularly in prayer, than others have. Yet all have their infirmities, not only bodily afflictions, persecutions of men, and temptations of Satan, but internal corruptions and weakness to oppose them and to discharge their duty to God and man, and also have their infirmities in the exercise of grace and in the performance of the work of prayer, though they are not left to sink under them, but are helped by, quote, the Spirit, by whom is meant not any tutelar angel or the human soul or the gift of the Spirit in prayer, but the Holy Spirit of God himself, who, as the word here used signifies, helps together, quote, with hope and patience, graces which he has implanted, and which he invigorates and draws forth into act and exercise, or with the saints laboring under their burdens, or with the Father and the Son, who also are helpers of the saints, and this helping of them implies that their infirmities and burdens are such as they must sink under unless they are helped, and which is done by the Spirit, by bringing to remembrance and applying the precious promises of the gospel, by shedding abroad the love of God in their hearts, by acting the part of the comforter to them, by putting strength into them, and by assisting them in prayer to God. And the next part of the verse, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought. And there's just a few points here, and I'll just briefly do the first few. The children, he talks about the children of God are not ignorant of the object of prayer, that is God, and all the all the nature of him, nor are they of the way of coming to God in prayer through Christ, nor the manner of performing it in faith, in fervency, sincerity, humility, nor of many other things respecting prayer are they ignorant of, as to both their duty and privilege, their own inability and need of assistance. But what they are ignorant of a lot of the time is chiefly the matter of prayer. Indeed, the whole Bible is an instruction in general to this work. So is the prayer Christ taught his disciples, and the several prayers of saints recorded in scriptures. The promises of God and their own wants and necessities may and do greatly direct them, as for instance, when under a sense of sin, to pray for a discovery of pardoning grace, when under darkness and desertions, for the light of God's countenance, when under a sense of weakness of grace and the strength of corruptions, for fresh supplies of grace and strength, for communion with God in ordinances, and etc. But what of all things they seem to be, at least at some times, at a loss about, is what to pray for with respect to things temporal, such as riches, honor, friends, to have present afflictions removed or temptations cease. And too often it is that they pray with greater importunity for lesser things and for the things of more importance, and from a more intemperate zeal, and with a view to self than for the glory of God. And the last part is, but the Spirit itself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Not the spirit of a man, or the gift of the Spirit in man, or a man endued with an extraordinary gift of the Spirit, but the Holy Ghost himself, who makes intercession for the saints, not in such sense as Christ does, for he intercedes not with the Father, but with them, with their spirits, not in heaven, but in their hearts, and not for sinners, but for saints, nor in the manner as Christ does, not by vocal prayer, as when he was on earth, nor by being the medium or way of access to God, nor by presenting the prayers of saints and the blood and sacrifice of Christ to God, as Christ does in heaven, nor as the saints make intercession for one another and for other persons, but he intercedes for them by making them to intercede. So he intercedes for them by making them to intercede. He indicts their prayers for them, not in a book, but in their hearts. He shows them their need, what their wants are. He stirs them up to prayer. He supplies them with arguments, puts words into their mouths, enlarges their hearts. Again, gives strength of faith in prayer and all the ardor and fervency of it. He enables them to come to God as their Father and gives them liberty and boldness in his presence, which requires a heart sprinkled from an evil conscience, faith in the blood and righteousness of Christ, and a view of God as a God of peace, grace, and mercy. And this intercession he makes, quote, with groanings which cannot be uttered. Not that the Spirit of God groans, but he stirs up groans. He stirs up groans in the saints, which suppose a burden on them, and their sense of it. So they're feeling it. And these are said to be unutterable. Saints under his influence, praying silently, without a voice, as Moses and Hannah did in 1 Samuel, and yet most ardently and fervently, or as not being able to express fully what they conceive in their minds, how great their burdens are, and their sense of their wants. Jude 20. But ye, beloved, building up yourselves on your most holy faith, praying in the Holy Ghost, and in God's answering our prayer, we have experience of the comforts of the Spirit and those spiritual solaces which he secretly giveth to his people. Hannah, when she had prayed, went away, and, quote, her countenance was no more sad. 1 Samuel 1, verse 18. In praying, we put forth the groans of the Spirit. In the answer God gives, the joys of the Spirit. Psalm 34, verse 5, they looked unto him and were lightened, and their faces were not ashamed. And this is where he kind of touches on an aspect of prayer that I really hadn't thought of before or read, I don't think. Point 2, it's very short, but he talks about it, that we should pray so as that the heart may be raised and lifted up unto God, and in some sort made like God. When Christ prayed to God, he is made partaker of the divine glory, as Moses also, by conversing with God. His face shined. Exodus 34, verses 29 and 30. Of course, this was extraordinary. This is not the normal. But sure, the oftener we converse with God, the more holy and heavenly should we grow, more like him in spirit, be changed into the glory of the Lord spiritually. And so we are, if we be instant and earnest in prayer. If we have communion with God, there will be some assimilation to God. And I did read Gill's take on this whole section, the verses that he gave about this. And it was very interesting. You should go read it if you have a chance, because he talked about Stephen's face glowing. And he also mentioned, of course, it was extraordinary, but you know, there's something to it residual even today that affects us much less than that, but in some similar way. And finally, the use is very short. It reproves our remiss, feeble, benumbed souls. There is no life in prayer, no working up of the heart to God in heaven. And I read that a few times, and he means, I think, when there is no life in prayer, no working up the heart to God in heaven. Either our prayers are formal and cursory, as opposed to James 5:16, or our prayers are doctrinal, instructive, rather than warming. We get light, spiritual light, I guess, over duties, but we should get life by prayer. This duty is not to inform the judgment, but to raise the affections, that they be all in a flame. Or else we content ourselves with a dull narrative, without getting up the heart to a sight of God in heaven, or are seldom in praises or adoration of the excellencies of God. That's the end of Sermon 1. And Lord willing, we'll start with Sermon 2 next time, Matthew 17, verse 2, and Luke 9, verse 29. So thank you for being here.
All right. Thank the Lord, and everyone online. Nice to have you with us. Go in God's graces. And Lord willing, we'll talk to you again soon.